Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought that I would talk about this little conversation that I found very particularly interesting. And this is going to be a conversation that I've seen by the boxing channel known none other as Boxing Ego. And what we all know about Boxing Ego is that, excuse me, that he is a part of the cult known as New Media slash that of the LDBC. And we all know that when it comes to those channels, that they do tend to have a problem, especially with certain fighters of a certain complexion, especially that of a Saul Canelo Alvarez, a Tyson Fury, an Alexander Usyk, a Vasily Lomachenko, and maybe a certain amount of other fighters as well. And basically, overall, they're very, very happy now that Canelo Alvarez has recently lost his last fight. And of course, that was against the light heavyweight champion, that of Dmitry Bivol. And I do have certain people that come on my comment section, or certain people that may come on my channel and they say, oh, well, your boy lost, or this guy lost, this guy lost. Well, keep in mind that when it comes to my channel, excuse me, I apologize for my throat, but keep in mind that when it comes to this channel, I don't really have any specific boys or any specific people overall that I'm a major fanboy of, because I'm not a fanboy. I'm not a fanboy of any of these fighters. And when Canelo Alvarez did lose, even though, of course, I hold him in very, very high respect, I did say, in my view, that I clearly thought that he lost the fight. And once again, this is not a channel where I make excuses. This is not a channel, all in all, where I tell people what they want to hear, all in all, just to appeal to a certain fan base. This is a channel where I tell people what they need to hear. And when it comes to Mr. Saul Canelo Alvarez, although for how great I do think that he truly is, if he is going to stand a chance against that of Dmitry Bivol in the rematch, he's going to have to make some massive, massive changes. And one of those changes, in my opinion, is that Canelo Alvarez is really going to have to come down at a lower weight within the rematch. And some people ask me, they said, well, how do you know, or why do you think that Canelo Alvarez, why do you think that he came in at a higher weight? Isn't it just that maybe Dmitry Bivol was that good? In my personal opinion, no. Because Dmitry Bivol, in my view, this is my opinion, I really don't even think that Dmitry Bivol was really that good in the fight. Excuse me. And I know a certain amount of people, they would highly disagree with that. To be honest with you, I don't think Dmitry Bivol really utilized his movement to the best of his ability. I thought that when Canelo Alvarez was cutting off the ring, I thought that he clearly was outboxing him. I thought that Canelo Alvarez clearly was getting to him within some of the first couple of rounds. But the problem was that Canelo Alvarez's stamina was so god awful that he really could not continue to box anymore for then really a couple of rounds. So Canelo Alvarez, the problem that he had is the same issue that Deontay Wilder had within the Tyson Fury fights, which is basically that his stamina was nowhere near to the same amount of his opponent. And basically what Canelo Alvarez was going to do, the best thing for him to do, in my opinion, is not try to compete with Dmitry Bivol in terms of size. Don't try to compete with him in terms of strength. What you're going to have to do is that you're going to have to make sure that your stamina is on par. You're going to have to cut off the ring against Dmitry Bivol. You're going to have to make sure that you pressure him. You're going to have to use that jab. You're overall going to have to launch a body attack very early on and hope that you can break Dmitry Bivol down. If there is one positive that Canelo Alvarez can pull out of this rematch against Dmitry Bivol, it's that he didn't even get stopped. Because Canelo Alvarez, a couple of times close in this fight, it did look like maybe there was a couple of times to where Dmitry Bivol, he could have potentially dropped him. And if he would have put on the pace, it's very possible that maybe he could have. But Canelo Alvarez, because of his will, because of some of his boxing IQ, and also because of his great chin, he was able to survive that fight. But if Canelo Alvarez does not make some major adjustments, especially towards his stamina and his strategy, he's not going to win this rematch. So we'll see all in all what ends up happening. But anyways, Mr. Boxing Ego, he is going to be talking about Mr. Canelo Alvarez allegedly ducking the Dmitry Bivol rematch, which of course I find very interesting, because according to Boxing Ego, he never wanted Canelo Alvarez to face Dmitry Bivol in the first place. And according to his own admission, at least allegedly, even though that we know that that is not the truth, but just to explain what he says, that he would rather Canelo Alvarez take the David Benavidez and Jamal Charlo deal, even though we know that that's not always 100% the truth, because we know that Boxing Ego, in one of his videos, he said that once Canelo was going to face Jamal Charlo, that he actually did not want to see the fight. Those are his own words. And if you don't believe me, I can pull up one of my videos. I can pull up one of my links. So once again, I just like Boxing Ego has receipts. I have receipts as well. But anyways, we're going to see what Mr. Boxing Ego has to say about this. Let's get into it.
Push Nello off me like, push the Nello fan, I'm like, Canelo Alvarez to decide if he's going to duck Dmitry Bivol. That's what I want to talk about in this video. What up, Fight World? It's your boy Ego, and I'm back with some more boxing. Wow. Canelo Alvarez still has the face of boxing on his Instagram. Now he has to face the music.
And once again, you can tell by just the way that Ego talks about Canelo Alvarez that their problem with Canelo Alvarez in the first place was never truly what they claimed it to be. If you're new to this channel, or if you're new overall to Boxing Ego's channel, what he'll basically claim is that the problem that he had with Canelo Alvarez was that he was allegedly avoiding fighters. That was not the problem with Canelo Alvarez at all. Their problem with Canelo was that he was not an American black fighter, and that Canelo Alvarez was looked at as the face of boxing. And you just heard overall with that statement, because if you were a person that truly overall just believed that Canelo Alvarez, that he was just avoiding a certain amount of fighters, and that was your main issue, why would you have a problem, all in all, with him calling himself the face of boxing? Because if you're allowed to go and object the person, whether you like that person or not, or whether, let me state this, whether you think that person, all in all, is facing the best competition or not, if someone is the face of the league. We can take a look at the NBA right now. LeBron James right now, I don't think is any longer the best player within the NBA, but one could certainly debate that he still is the face of the league, at least debatably. So why would you get mad at something about that? It's very clear once again that these guys, that their issue with Canelo is that not only that he was looked at as the face of boxing, which he more than likely still probably is just because of his popularity, but on top of that he also was ranked as the #1 pound-for-pound fighter. It's very, very clear that if you're intelligent enough at what's going on, that is their main issue.
And face reality with a recent loss. Second official loss, even though I think he should.
For example, I could state this about Gervonta Tank Davis. Gervonta Tank Davis, I don't think has been facing the best competition for pretty much the majority of his career. And his next fight, against Rolly Romero, and I'll be doing my fight prediction about that next week. No offense against Gervonta Tank Davis, but I really don't find that fight to be interesting at all. I'm probably not even going to get that fight because I don't think Rolly Romero, I don't think he really stands a chance at all. There's no possible chance that he has a beating Gervonta Tank Davis. And it's very interesting because Boxing Ego, who is the same guy that was trying to claim that Canelo Alvarez was avoiding certain fights and that Tyson Fury was avoiding certain fights, he'll claim that Gervonta Tank Davis versus Rolly Romero is a banging fight, which for those of us in reality that know anything about boxing, we know that is not a banging fight. That is a horrible fight, and I know a lot of people, they may not agree with that. Gervonta Tank Davis versus Rolly Romero, that's just a lamb coming in for the slaughter. If you know anything about Rolly Romero, yes, he's very, very powerful, but he can't box whatsoever. He's almost like a weaker version of Ricardo Mayorga, for those of you who remember that boxer back in the day. But anyway.
Others.
But my point being about Gervonta Tank Davis is that even though I can claim that, and once again, I'm not a person that loves or hates any of these guys, I just get my logical and objective perspective. Gervonta Tank Davis, no, he doesn't face the best of competition as of late, but at the end of the day, he is one of the 10 faces of boxing. You certainly could claim that.
And that's against Dmitry Bivol. Now, you heard the clip at the beginning. Ironically enough, the Canelo man fans, the Chupapi Muñeños, they've been having a very difficult time embracing this loss for Canelo. It's like,
once again, for a man who acts borderline homosexual and is about 2 steps away from beating his meat whenever a Deontay Wilder video comes on, he sure as hell talks a hot one overall for alleged fanboys. And listen, I get it, it's not good overall to be a fanboy whatsoever. But I don't understand how someone, you should have heard the way that this dude was talking about Deontay Wilder. He was acting like his goddamn mistress. I mean, every time this man would talk about Deontay Wilder, he wouldn't even be talking overall about his fighting style. He'd be like, man, look at those abs. Look at those muscles. It's like, goddamn. You got something to tell us?
Bad dream, and they're waking up from it. And then they find out it wasn't a dream at all. It was reality. Dmitry Bivol did that. Dmitry Bivol boxed well. Jab was on point. Used some.
Well, really, Dmitry Bivol, in my opinion, he really didn't box as well as what some people are trying to say. and I know a lot of people would disagree with me on that. It's just that Canelo Alvarez really was so bad, and a lot of people, they may not agree with that. Listen, I like Canelo. I think that Canelo is an extraordinary fighter. But if Canelo Alvarez is going to kick it in gear, and if he's going to beat Dmitry Bivol, he has to be very, very harshly real with himself. He has to say that he was not up to par in that first fight. He has to state that if he fights anywhere near to what he did in that first fight, he's not going to win that fight. If he fights anywhere near to what he did in that first fight, no chance that he wins that second fight whatsoever. So Canelo Alvarez really has to kick it in gear. His stamina has to be a whole lot better. His strategy has to be better. And what he's mainly going to have to do in that fight is that he's going to have to pressure Dmitry Bivol. And you're not going to beat Dmitry Bivol overall by trying to just compete with him in terms of power v power, because more than likely Dmitry Bivol is going to have more power than you. When Floyd Mayweather Jr. went up in the weight divisions and was facing that of Miguel Cotto and was facing that of Canelo Alvarez, Floyd Mayweather Jr., he didn't try to compete with them in terms of the weight. All he did maybe was just maybe go up to about 150 pounds, 152 pounds at most, and basically he stayed pretty much at his regular weight. And he said, you know what? My stamina not only is going to be on par, but I'm going to compete with these guys. Sure, I can't compete with them in terms of power and in terms of speed, but, or not at speed, excuse me. I can't compete with them in terms of power and in terms of weight, but what I can compete with them in is my skill set, my speed, my defensive ability. So Canelo Alvarez, unfortunately, in that fight against Dmitry Bivol, I don't think that it was the smartest of moves to gain the muscle mass that he did. And looking at some of the workout videos, looking at some of the pictures, it's very clear that he did get bigger for this fight. And I think I understand the tactic. I think I understand overall, the mentality. But at the end of the day, it was not the smartest thing to do. And if Canelo Alvarez is going to compete with Dmitry Bivol, he has to lose some of that muscle mass. Just like Anthony Joshua had to lose some of that muscle mass for the Andy Ruiz rematch.
Footwork. Push Nello on me like, ugh. And he got busy. Credit to him. However, now Canelo is faced with the decision. Now, it's funny to hear Eddie Hearn even talk on this because, one, you're not going to get an actual non-biased depiction. He keeps saying things like, oh, me and Canelo, we worked together for a while and we're good friends and I'm on Canelo's team. So I don't look for Eddie Hearn to give any type of comments on Canelo that are non-biased and AKA keep it real. That's why you guys subscribe to my channel. In the last 30 days...
No, your channel is not really objective and honest. I don't understand on Boxing Ego once again, or some of these other channels that I see. I don't understand how some of these guys really even have the goal or overall say with a straight face, this is why you come to my channel, because you can take a look at so many narratives. I mean, this is the same guy. This is the same idiot that claimed that Tyson Fury clearly cheated in those Deontay Wilder fights when he clearly was very biased on that. This is the same guy that protects Gervonta Tank Davis when he's really repeatedly facing B and C grade fighters. I mean, this is the same guy that has been trying to tear down Canelo Alvarez and Tyson Fury for a very, very decently long time for very obvious emotional and pro-racial reasons. So this is not the guy, as well as Dante's Boxing Nation, as well as Aki TV. These are not the guys overall that you go to for objective and logical analysis. And it's very hard to go to someone for an objective and logical analysis because 99.9% of people out there aren't that objective or logical. But we'll see what happens. Anyway.
I looked at my YouTube analytics and it showed me something. The last 30 days, 50% of the people that watch my content subscribed. The other 50% did not. Let me know what I could do to earn your subscription. I release content daily, boxing lives, boxing news. This is your all access. Access has now been granted. So make sure you consider subscribing. It goes a long way, really to further the reach so other people are aware of the content and the message gets out. So appreciate you guys for subscribing. Let's continue. So Canelo Alvarez and Eddie Hearn, this whole duo, it's really gone wrong because Canelo really should have taken a deal with, in my opinion, PBC and Showtime. And he chose to...
Well, it would have been, excuse me, it would have been a great deal without the PBC and Showtime deal. But at the end of the day, once again, I had no problem with Canelo Alvarez signing that with Dmitry Bivol because I thought that Dmitry Bivol would be the biggest threat, and once again, I was correct. It's just, it is what it is, and I'm not correct about everything, but at the end of the day, once again, I do have a sense of logic and objectivity. Dmitry Bivol is a much bigger threat, at least if you have a Canelo Alvarez that is at his best. Dmitry Bivol overall, and the reason why I state that is because I do wonder how Canelo Alvarez is going to be after this loss. But we'll see what happens, especially if that stamina, if that doesn't return to par. But we'll see what happens. It should. But like I said, Dmitry Bivol, in my view, he always was a much bigger threat than what a Jamal Charlo or what a David Benavidez ever were or ever will be. That's just my opinion on the matter. And I do think that I am still correct about that. And I think that that's the reason why Dmitry Bivol was able to defeat Canelo Alvarez in the fashion that he was able to. Now, Canelo, in my opinion, could have put on a much better performance had overall he been better prepared, I think, for the match. But, he did not show up overall in that condition. So it is what it is.
Forgo that deal.
Once again, if you take a look at Jamal Charlo, and I don't want to, do fight math here, but just go ahead and take a look at this fight against Matt Korobov, Juan Macias Montiel, even Julian J. Rock Williams. That is not a guy that's going to defeat Canelo Alvarez at his best. I'm sorry. It's just, it's not going to happen. All right, and David Benavidez, very good fighter, also very one-dimensional, at least from my viewing, but it is what it is.
And didn't end up taking the PBC deal, only to lose, to do horrible ratings. Leonard Ellerby came out and said he knows the true numbers, and it did around 300,000. This has to be...
Well, Ego, you shouldn't be worrying about that because allegedly that's pocket watching. Remember the video that I did a very, very long time ago about Gervonta Tank Davis, allegedly what he said when those numbers failed and they didn't even do 100,000 in his last fight against Isaac Pitbull Cruz because no one gave a shit about that fight because Isaac Pitbull Cruz is not that good of a fighter. That's not me saying that he's not a good fighter, but he's not a great fighter. He's never even been a legitimate champion. Basically, what was Boxing Ego saying? You guys are pocket watching. You guys are broke boxing fans. They're not broke boxing fans. They just don't want to see that shit. It just is what it is. Now, with Canelo Alvarez, the reason why that one probably did not do as great as numbers, which is what I told overall a certain amount of people in my videos, was because Dmitry Bivol is not as well known as what a David Benavidez or Gennady Golovkin or Jamal Charlo are. Because he's a Russian fighter, he's a person that has not been as heavily promoted. But what you know about Dmitry Bivol is that he's a very highly fresh and dangerous fighter. And that's why the fight was a very, very decently great fight. And if the rematch happens, more than likely the ratings are going to go up because they are going to wonder if Canelo Alvarez can beat him in the rematch. Excuse me. And now Dmitry Bivol has been more put on the map. But we'll see what happens. But that's why I give Canelo Alvarez a lot of credit for taking that fight in the first place because Dmitry Bivol was no slouch. And don't get me wrong, David Benavidez and Jamal Charlo, they're not slouches either, but they're just not the fighter. They're not the skilled fighter, and they're also not the size of a Dmitry Bivol.
The failure for Canelo Alvarez. And the reason why all these different numbers that have come out seem to be accurate is because we know Eddie Hearns. And if Canelo, before the fight, Eddie Hearn was boasting and saying that Canelo could be the greatest fighter of all time and all this goofy stuff. And that was very short-lived because that Saturday he would lose. So he was saying Canelo's the greatest fighter and, he makes an argument, Mexico best fighter ever, even though you've seen Julio Cesar Chavez, Benito Lopez, Salvador Sanchez, Eric Morales, Marco Antonio Barrera,
People always bring up Marco Antonio Barrera, Juan Manuel Marquez. Listen, don't get me wrong. None of those fighters are, let me tell you the only Mexican fighters, in my view, that are on the same level as Canelo, maybe above him. Julio Cesar Chavez Sr., and that's about it. There's no other Mexican fighter in the history of Mexico or Mexican-American fighters, in my view, that are on the same level as Canelo. I'm sorry, but if you truly believe that Marco Antonio Barrera and Juan Manuel Marquez and Eric Morales and all those other guys who are above Canelo, I mean, don't get me wrong. I understand all those guys are great fighters. They're not a Canelo Alvarez. I understand Canelo just recently lost to Dmitry Bivol, and once upon a time he also lost to Floyd Mayweather Jr. Well, if you're going to debate that those fighters are truly greater than that of Canelo Alvarez, you would have to debate that they won the majority of their big fights in their career. And a lot of the times those fighters didn't. When you talk about Juan Manuel Marquez, now he is an all-time great fighter in my opinion, don't get me wrong. And there's a lot of fighters that I count as all-time great fighters, but he's not on the same level as Canelo Alvarez. He's not on the same level as Canelo. Do we think that Marquez could have went to a weight class overall or fought a fighter that I'm not going to say was twice his size, but outsized him, kind of like what Dmitry Bivol did to Canelo, and that he could have beat that fighter? Of course not. Of course not. He could not even defeat Manny Pacquiao. He could not even defeat Timothy Bradley. Now, that was when he was a bit older. But at the end of the day, Juan Manuel Marquez, although as good of a fighter as he was, he's not a Canelo Alvarez. Neither is Eric Morales. Neither is Marco Antonio Barrera. Neither is Oscar De La Hoya. Neither is Fernando Vargas. Any of those fighters. Now, Finito Lopez, great fighter, but I'm not quite sure if I would put him on the same level as Canelo because I'm not really sure how great his competition was for how light that he was. But, it is what it is. And Salvador Sanchez, all-time great fighter as well, probably would be within my top 30. So around that Canelo Alvarez range, in my opinion. But Salvador Sanchez, unfortunately, I just don't think that he had enough in his career. So like I said, the only fighter, debatably, in my opinion, that is within that Canelo Alvarez conversation is Chavez Sr. And that's talking from a logical and objective standpoint. Because a lot of people, of course, after a fighter loses, they say, oh, well, this, and this. Well, we have to be careful. Because, people, of course, now they'll say, well, Oscar De La Hoya and Marquez and all these guys were greater. Well, were they really? Because would Oscar De La Hoya really go up to a weight class to where he was completely outsized? And keep in mind, Oscar De La Hoya was at least a natural 147 to 154 pounder. He was beating on guys in the 130s that really were nowhere near his own same size. That's why Oscar De La Hoya looked so dominant in the lighter weight classes, but then when he went up to the higher ones, he didn't really look as good. When Oscar De La Hoya tried to do a move similar to what Canelo Alvarez did, he ended up getting stopped by Bernard Hopkins. A lot of people did not even truly believe that he ended up defeating Felix Sturm. So please, before you really say anything irrational or illogical, just because you have an emotional issue with a fighter, let's truly think about the logical implications. Let's truly think about, is this actually, logical? Would this have actually happened? And most of the times the answer is no.
You've had all these other great fighters, but Eddie Hearn was pitching this notion that it was Canelo who superseded all of them. And then he loses right after.
Because Canelo Alvarez more than likely did supersede the majority of them. But you did not want to have that narrative out there. You've been trying to push the narrative that, the LDBC and new media, because they're a pro-black cult, and I know a lot of people, they're not going to like that. It just is what it is. It's the truth. I'm not here to spare feelings. I'm here to tell people what they need to hear. And that is what those channels are. All right? It is what it is. That is what those channels are. And that is the main reason why they were preying on Canelo Alvarez's downfall. All right? It is what it is. Yes, Canelo Alvarez has superseded Juan Manuel Marquez. Yes, he has superseded Eric Morales and Marco Antonio Barrera. Yes, he has superseded Oscar De La Hoya. He has superseded all those fighters. There is nothing that those fighters did within their career that would supersede Canelo Alvarez. Nothing. Nothing in their career whatsoever. All right? They lost too many of their big fights.
And he's saying he's the face of boxing and number one or star and stuff. So you would expect complete.
Well, where is the evidence basically disproving that? And even if we're talking about the last fight allegedly doing something like 300,000 pay-per-view buys, has Errol Spence or Terrence Crawford, let's just talk about them, have they basically done any of those numbers? Did Gervonta Tank Davis do those numbers in his last fight? We know damn well that he didn't do those numbers in his last fight because no one would release those numbers. And then when you talked about those numbers, you basically said that people were pocket watching. So let's be real, Ego. And you want to talk about logical and objective analysis. You don't have that ability.
Different numbers than, what Charlo and Gervonta Davis.
And don't get me wrong, Canelo Alvarez does deserve to be criticized to a degree after losing that fight in the way that he did. Because in my opinion, I thought that he looked really, really poor. I didn't even think that it was just that Dmitry Bivol looked that good. I can tell a difference between a fight to where a fighter looked as good as they did because they're just that talented. And I can tell, a fighter looked as good in a fight because the fighter that they somewhat fought did not really come in with the best game plan. For example, when Jermell Charlo fought Brian Castano in the rematch, and I still seen some vulnerabilities, I thought that Jermell Charlo won that fight highly because Brian Castano, He just came in there with the dumbest game plan. He did not come in there with a great game plan at all. Now, don't get me wrong, that's not me trying to discredit him, but I think that that's a big part of the reason why he looks so good. If we also want to take a look maybe at some other fights, maybe if I were to come up with another example, I don't want to say Tyson Fury versus Deontay Wilder because that pretty much was the best version of Deontay Wilder that was ever going to show up anyway. But maybe if you wanted to bring up that, so something like that. But there are certain times where you can take a look at a fight and you're like, you know what, that fighter, that fighter really overall didn't come up with, the best game plan. Or if you want to use another example, Teofimo Lopez versus George Kambosos. I thought the reason why George Kambosos won that fight, not only because he showed that he was a little bit more skilled than what we all thought, but on top of that, I think that Teofimo did not take him seriously whatsoever. But it is what it is. That's not me saying that I don't think that Canelo took Dmitry Bivol seriously. I think that he did. But I think that Canelo, maybe there is a possibility that he was a little bit too arrogant for his own good. And I think all in all that it was a huge mistake to add on the extra muscle mass. But we'll see what Canelo Alvarez does.
And Errol Spence have produced, if this is in fact true. But
right, but if you're talking about in terms of numbers, or well, he's talking about overall, maybe I believe probably the possible fights. Don't get me wrong, the Errol Spence fight would be a very very big fight. I just don't think all in all that it does anything for Canelo at the moment. Like I said, Canelo going after Dmitry Bivol, that was a chase to later on become a top 10 boxer within history. If he ends up defeating Errol Spence Jr., you go, let's be real, are you really going to give him credit in the first place? These guys overall basically said the only way that Canelo, allegedly, at least according to them, the only way that he really would fight a black fighter in the first place is if they were two weight classes lower. And Errol Spence is two weight classes lower. So do you really want him to face Errol Spence Jr. or do you not want him to? Because they're not really going to give Canelo Alvarez credit either way. But anyway.
Doesn't look to be the case. So, Canelo's in a very difficult place. But I'm glad.
I agree. And of course, and basically you heard Boxing Ego state, I'm glad. Of course he's glad because he does not like Canelo Alvarez. But it's a good thing for Canelo Alvarez at the current moment in time to be in this difficult place. It'll overall wake him up a little bit more. And overall, sometimes when it comes to certain people, after their losses, they learn from them. Anthony Joshua, after the Andrew Ruiz loss, he learned a lot. He ended up winning the rematch. All right. Andre Ward, after that first Kovalev fight, now he didn't end up losing that fight, but he nearly lost it. It was a very close fight. He ended up learning from that rematch. The question is about Canelo Alvarez is at this point in time in his career, what more can he learn? Will he learn from his mistakes? Or overall, will he be another Deontay Wilder, basically, or Teofimo Lopez, and try to tell lies to himself and overall to basically make excuses for that loss? If Canelo has any chance of defeating Dmitry Bivol in the rematch, he cannot do that. He has to be very real with himself. He has to say, you know what, my performance, it was not up to par. It was a very poor performance from me. I should have not gained the muscle mass in the weight that I did. And on top of that, I need a better strategy. All right, so Canelo is going to have to come into that fight pretty much, I'm not going to say as a new fighter, but he's going to have to be much, much, much better than what he was in the first fight. No doubt about it. No doubt about it.
Because I like to see truth.
Because like I just said in Jermell Charlo, with the Jermell Charlo-Brian Castano fight, the reason why Brian Castano lost that fight the way that he did is because Brian Castano, he didn't up his level compared to what it was in the first fight. Now, I thought Brian Castano clearly won the first fight against Jermell Charlo 8-4, both times that I watched it. But the problem was in the rematch is that Jermell Charlo was the more intelligent fighter. All right, and then on top of that, they were already similar in terms of his skill set. I always thought that Brian Castano, at his best, was the more talented fighter by a little bit, but he certainly didn't show it in the rematch. And the reason why it didn't show in the rematch is because Brian Castano's boxing IQ and his game plan was piss poor. And so Canelo, he's going to have to do something similar to kind of what Jermell Charlo did in the rematch against Tony Harrison, and also especially in the rematch against Brian Castano, or what any all-time great fighter has done in a rematch, which basically means that you're going to have to turn it up to another level, especially, much more than what you were in the first fight, because on the first fight, your performance was very piss poor. I mean, Canelo Alvarez was breathing heavy after round 4. Pretty much every round after that, he pretty much lost.
Character revealed, and for once, Canelo is at some type of deficit where some fans have lost faith in his ability. Some people do not believe he can beat Bivol. So we're gonna see what Canelo's made of if he does.
What I'll certainly say is this: Boxing Ego certainly brings up a very good point. That'll be the big question. Can Canelo Alvarez beat someone like a Dmitry Bivol? Because looking at that performance, if there was a rematch that was going to be set up at the current moment in time, I would have to favor Dmitry Bivol. Because I need to know that Canelo Alvarez is willing overall, and I think that more than likely he will be. But we'll see if Canelo Alvarez is on that same level as maybe what some of the great fighters were before him. Maybe like that of, a Manny Pacquiao when he rematched Juan Manuel Marquez, or Floyd Mayweather Jr. when he rematched Jose Luis Castillo, or he rematched Marcos Maidana, or an Andre Ward when he rematched Sergey Kovalev. In my opinion, Canelo was already kind of on the level of an Andre Ward just because of what he's accomplished and because of his skill set. But the big question is about Canelo because to me, he's already on that level. He's already on that top 30 of all time level. I know a lot of people, they're not going to agree with that. Listen, Canelo has accomplished a lot in his career. So I'm not really worried about him being within my top 50, / top 30 of all time. What the question is about Canelo is, will he one day eventually possibly become a top 10 fighter of all time? Will he maybe get on that level? Or will he maybe be, let's just state this for example, will he be another Roberto Duran? Someone who maybe, went up the weight classes, couldn't win some of the bigger fights that maybe he had a chance to, and I know a certain amount of people that are not going to agree with that, but it just is what it is. That's why, in my opinion, if we were to talk about Manny Pacquiao and Floyd Mayweather Jr. versus Roberto Duran, in my opinion, both of those fighters have to be above Roberto Duran. Even, no matter how skilled you think Roberto Duran was, Roberto, when he usually moved up the weight classes, he lost a lot of the bigger fights. That's not me saying that he lost every big fight when he went up in the weight classes. Of course, he beat Davey Moore. He beat, I believe, who the hell was that one fighter at 160 pounds, I believe. He gave Marvin Hagler a hell of a time as well, but Iran Barkley, I believe was his name, Iran Barkley. But Canelo Alvarez, once again, if he's going to be eventually within that top 10 level, he is going to have to defeat Dmitry Bivol in the rematch, no doubt about it. No doubt about it. And I like the Jamal Charlo and David Benavidez fights as well. But in my opinion, those just aren't as big as legacy fights as what a Dmitry Bivol fight is. Because Dmitry Bivol, like I said, he's he's the fighter that Canelo Alvarez is mainly going to have to worry about. Him and Artur Beterbiev.
Decides to duck Dmitry Bivol, or if he decides to go ahead and fight him. But for the first time in a while, all this no boxing, no life, all that's going to be put to the test. No boxing, no life, huh? Take the rematch. Now, Eddie Hearn.
I agree with you, Mr. Ego, and you should have had the same energy with some of the fighters like that of a Deontay Wilder. It's actually a very good thing that Boxing Ego is being very critical of Canelo, because this is what Canelo Alvarez needs right now. In my opinion, Canelo Alvarez, now don't get me wrong, is not a good thing just to hate on people, but criticism is needed. Canelo does need a kick in the ass overall. He does need someone, harsh to tell him, listen, you did not perform well at all in that fight. In fact, it was really piss poor from your part. And if you're going to win that rematch, you need to perform a hell of a lot better than what you did. Because that's the reason why Deontay Wilder lost the rematches against Tyson Fury in the way that he did. Because people like Boxing Ego, they were telling him so many goddamn excuses. And he didn't improve whatsoever because there was really nothing that he tried to improve on. At least not much.
At the beginning of the clip that I played, he said that Canelo, he's a man's man, and Canelo, he'll probably want the rematch, and he won't want any excuses. But if you pay attention to what he said also that Canelo Alvarez, the ball's in his court. He also said up to him and Eddie Reynoso on what they decide, and that's going to show if they want. So basically, he already put everything in motion, and he's telling you, if Canelo doesn't take the rematch, it was a decision that he made. He said he's...
Well, of course. And Canelo Alvarez, he has the right to do whatever he wants to do at this point in time in his career. But I think that the best thing for Canelo, well, depending on maybe what it could do, if Canelo maybe, or what he could do, if Canelo maybe wants to go back down to 168, face a Jamal Charlo or a David Benavidez, maybe even face a Gennady Golovkin in a third fight, take a little bit of break, from the 175-pound division, try to gain back a little bit of confidence. I don't think that that would be the worst thing in the world. Maybe also face that of Iluma Makabu at the end of the year. I don't think that that would be the worst thing in the world because that maybe would get you used to the power of the light heavyweight division, and then also that would get you used to maybe facing a Dmitry Bivol and an Artur Beterbiev. But then after those fights, I would like to see Canelo in a rematch against Dmitry Bivol. But who knows? Maybe the best thing for Canelo Alvarez right now would not really to be taking a rematch immediately. Another reason why I thought Deontay Wilder did not make the best of moves is because Deontay Wilder got his ass kicked in those Tyson Fury fights, and he really, in my opinion, was not going to do much better in the third fight, and that's pretty much exactly what happened. That's pretty much exactly what I predicted. If Canelo rematches him immediately, there is a possibility that maybe that is not the best thing for him, but we'll see what happens.
The promoter, so he presents the options to a guy like Canelo Alvarez, and then Canelo decides from there what it's going to be and what it's not going to be. So if the Bivol fight doesn't happen, then it is Canelo's fault and his team's fault. The other thing that puts Canelo in a pinch and makes no sense is you listen to the dialogue from Eddie Hearn. He keeps saying, oh, Canelo did all this, dared to be great. He wants these obscene, he wants to take.
Well, he did dare to be great because Canelo Alvarez went up to 175 pounds. There was no weight drain. He fought Dmitry Bivol, which in my opinion was the most dangerous fight for him potentially out there. Certainly more dangerous than Charlo and Benavidez, even though they're not going to put that out there. Basically, what that would be like is if Gervonta Tank Davis, if he went up to 140 and fought someone like a Josh Taylor, except even better. And a certain amount of people would say, really, why would you say even better? Because Josh Taylor, in my opinion, he's not really the skilled fighter that a Dmitry Bivol is for his weight division. And a certain amount of people, they would not agree with that. Just take a look at Josh Taylor in his last fight against Jack Catterall.
Obscene challenges because he was so proven at middleweight and super middleweight, even though that's not the case because he never fought Demetrius Andrade. He never fought Jamal Charlo.
Well, no, actually, that is the case. Canelo Alvarez did prove himself at middleweight. Now, don't get me wrong. I would like to see the Demetrius Bivol and Jamal Charlo fights just as much as the next. But Canelo has pretty much already fought fighters that not already have been on their level, but have really been above them. Gennady Golovkin, I know a lot of people, they're not, they're not going to like it, but it is what it is. Gennady Golovkin, in my opinion, a prime Gennady Golovkin is probably a level or two above a prime Jamal Charlo and probably about a level above a Demetrius Bivol Andrade. Once again, Andrade is, he's not a bad fighter. I've just never seen what a lot of people see. All you have to do is look at some of his fights against Jack Colkay and Liam Williams, and even some of his best performances, I was never really all that impressed. I think that what he really is, he's almost like a poor man's Shakur Stevenson. That's what he reminds me of.
And he never fought David Benavidez, who I believe are easily better than anyone that he's really fought, and stylistically has the ability to, and I'm talking about in those divisions, I'm not talking about career-wise, but I'm saying that middleweight and super middleweight, those guys.
You could argue that David Benavidez is potentially more dangerous than that of Billy Joe Saunders and Caleb Plant. I would understand that. But David Benavidez is not more dangerous than Dmitry Bivol. So it is what it is.
Have the most complexities for Canelo's style. And I've been saying this for a while.
Well, what complexities does David Benavidez really have? All David Benavidez, all he really does is go forward and try to outpressure you. That's that's really all he has. There's no offense against David Benavidez, but he's not the most complex of fighting styles. It just it is what it is. He's pretty much a bigger, faster version of Antonio Margarito with less power. That's pretty much all he is. That's all David Benavidez has, and he has a very leaky defense. He doesn't have an A-grade chin. He also does not have A-grade power. I like David Benavidez. I think that he's a decent challenge, but he's not he's not someone, in my opinion, that's going to defeat Canelo Alvarez at his best. That's not me saying that I would not want to see the fight. But Dmitry Bivol, in my opinion, yes, at the end of the day, if you take a look at it objectively and logically, yes, he was a bigger challenge.
And he stayed away from a while. You know what I'm saying?
And keep in mind that Boxing Ego is the same guy that said that Gervonta Tank Davis versus Rolly Romero, that's a big fight. So allegedly that's a big fight. Gervonta Tank Davis, who clearly, in my opinion, is an A-grade talent, fighting someone that really is not even a B-grade talent. Overall, apparently that's supposed to be a big fight. But Canelo facing Dmitry Bivol, debatably the best 175-pounder in the world. Overall, apparently that's not a big fight.
To this day, as of me recording this video, he hasn't fought him. But Eddie Hearn keeps making these excuses and suggesting that, Canelo has to dare to be great and do all this extra stuff in order to find a challenge, which is inaccurate. It's a misrepresentation of the facts. David Benavidez.
Well, the Jamal Charlo and David Benavidez fight, those would be great fights for numbers. But if the best version of Canelo Alvarez really shows up against those fighters are really not going to have that much of a chance. And I know a lot of people, they may disagree with me there, especially Jamal Charlo. Jamal Charlo really has nothing to bring to Canelo Alvarez. He just has nothing. He's very straightforward. He fights very tall. He gets hit way too often. He has good power, but it's not really on the same level as what a prime Gennady Golovkin was. It certainly isn't on the same level as a Dmitry Bivol. He doesn't really have the best of movement. He doesn't have the best of feet. I mean, really the only argument that these guys try to use for Jamal Charlo is really that he's a black American fighter and that Canelo Alvarez, that he needs to face more black fighters. But Jamal Charlo is not a slickster. That's not what he is. He's not a Floyd Mayweather Jr. Hell, he's really not even an Air Sonny Lara. So it is what it is.
Was at 168. You were undisputed. He had the belts before you, or at least the WBC belt. Give him a crack at it. And then you would have been defending the title, and then we wouldn't have to hear these piddly weight excuses because you would be at your comfortable weight. Eddie Hearn keeps saying, oh, Canelo's true weight is 168. Nobody told him to move up. That was his decision. Nobody told him to do anything that he's done in his recent career, right?
Well, all in all, the point that Ego makes, I somewhat get the point that he's making. But the thing with Canelo Alvarez is that at this point in time, he was the clear number one pound for pound fighter, at least he was, before he ended up losing to Dmitry Bivol. And Canelo Alvarez, he wasn't pulling a Mikey Garcia, where basically it was very clear that Mikey Garcia had no chance overall to beat Errol Spence Jr., but the only reason why he moved up was to clearly avoid a Vasily Lomachenko. Or the reason why Kell Brook moved up to 160 to face Gennady Triple G Golovkin was to clearly avoid an Errol Spence Jr. fight. That's not what Canelo Alvarez was doing. Don't get me wrong, the Jamal Charlo and David Benavidez fights, they're great fights. But Canelo Alvarez, I think, was looking at history. Unfortunately, it didn't pan out for him because I don't think that he put the best strategies out there. But we'll see what Canelo Alvarez does from here.
We're far removed from that Canelo where he's not in the driver's seat and he doesn't know it. You know what I'm saying? Last time that happened, maybe the Miguel Cotto fight, he wasn't the A side or, wasn't all the way the A side, things like that. But we've been far removed from that. So no one told Canelo, I have no sympathy, no empathy. This is boxing. Most guys don't get to pick their fights in general.
Well, I agree with you to a degree. I don't overall really have a great amount of empathy either, but that's because I don't think that Canelo Alvarez put on the best strategy. But the reason why you don't really have any empathy for Canelo is because Canelo was not the right complexion. You had a great amount of empathy towards Deontay Wilder, and you still whine like a bitch about Deontay Wilder to this day overall because you're really pissed off that Deontay Wilder is never going to be remembered as the best heavyweight of this generation. You still notice that these guys, whenever they bring up Deontay Wilder, they're still so heartbroken over that loss. And you're not supposed to be heartbroken over a loss, especially one that isn't your own. But these guys count it as their own because all in all, they're major fanboys. And you're not supposed to be that.
And, select guys and get guys, scope out how they look and, stay away from certain fighters.
And here Boxing Ego goes again, claiming that Canelo Alvarez, that he fights people off their worst performances, yada, yada, yada. Once again, these are the same people that claim that they want to see Canelo Alvarez allegedly face Jamal Charlo. But then overall, when he was about to face Jamal Charlo, then Boxing Ego and one of these guys say, well, you know what, we really don't want to see the fight now because it should have happened years ago. Once again, their problem with Canelo Alvarez is not that allegedly that he's avoiding the best fights. Their problem with Canelo is that overall he was looked at as a Caucasian Hispanic and they did not want him to be the face of boxing, and they certainly did not want him to be remembered as the number one pound for pound fighter. All right, so it is what it is. So that is why they were so happy and they were smiling year from year overall that Canelo Alvarez, that he lost that fight, because right now on the pound for pound list, you have Canelo, you have overall Alexander Usyk, and you also have Tyson Fury high up on the pound for pound list, and they don't like that. All right, they don't like that. But it is what it is. Anyway.
Styles, most people don't have that.
And don't get me wrong, because a lot of people, they'll come on my channel and they'll state, oh, well, it seems like you have a problem with black fighters. Well, if you think that I have a problem with black fighters, go ahead and take a look at my videos of Terrence Bud Crawford, Errol Spence Jr., Anthony Joshua. Deontay Wilder, I tell the truth and I give a logical and objective perspective on every single one of those fighters. Gervonta Tank Davis, doesn't matter who it is. All right, Devin Haney, Shakur Stevenson. I give credit where credit is due to everybody. So if you think that I have a racial issue or that I have a problem with a certain fighter and it's unjust, no problem. Point it out in the comment section. Let me know what your argument is. If it's logical and objective, I certainly will respond. But I never get any logical and objective arguments on those. I only get these emotional ass dudes that come in my comment section and basically say, oh, well, it seems like you have a problem with those fighters. I have no problem with any fighter out there because it's my job to be logical and objective.
So Canelo's not special. He doesn't get special treatment. He's done good things for his career. He's a hell of a fighter. I give him that. I give him the same respect that I give any fighter, right?
Well, no, that's not true. You don't really give him the same respect because you've been basically trying to tear down Canelo Alvarez for his whole entire career, or at least especially ever since that he's been ranked the number one pound for pound fighter. But yes, it's very very obvious. You really don't need overall, just a certain amount of boxing intelligence to realize that Canelo is an all time great fighter. Pretty much anyone can see that.
And with all these weight excuses from the Canelo Chupapi Muñeños and Eddie Hearn saying, oh, he had to stretch himself and he knows now this is not his true calling and light heavyweight is not his real division. Eddie Hearn said something very...
Well, light heavyweight is not truly Canelo Alvarez's natural weight division. His natural weight division is pretty much around that 160, 168 pound area. Probably at around 160 pounds. But at the end of the day, Canelo Alvarez was favored to win this fight. So you are going to have to be criticized to a certain degree. It's not that Canelo Alvarez gets off of criticism, but this was a very, very big fight. So I'll cut Canelo Alvarez a little bit of slack, but at the end of the day, he does have to be somewhat criticized. He does have to be somewhat dethroned as the number one pound for pound fighter because of this loss. It just is what it is. But the question is can Canelo Alvarez come back? Because I think that there's a certain amount of adjustments that he can make to possibly win the rematch. I'm not saying that I would favor him 100% because of the way that he looked, but I think that Canelo Alvarez, the first step of beating Dmitry Bivol is, first of all, to get rid of some of that muscle mass, because that was not helping you out in this fight whatsoever.
Imperative and important that you pay attention to. He says Canelo might not want to fight Dmitry Bivol at 168 after he was just talking about Dmitry Bivol moving down to 160.
In my view, the best move for Canelo Alvarez to face Dmitry Bivol, it would be a 175. Because if Dmitry Bivol, let's just say, because Dmitry Bivol probably can make 168 because even though, he is clearly bigger than Canelo, he's not the biggest for 175. So in my opinion, Canelo, if he's going to face Dmitry Bivol, I would like to see it once again at 175. But Canelo overall cannot make himself as big as what he was. He has to make sure, all in all, that he's a little bit down in weight. Yes, understandably, I understand that, you may fear that the power may not translate as well. But at the end of the day, you're going to have to rely on your movement. You're going to have to rely on your defense. You're also going to have to rely on your stamina because your stamina was piss poor in that first fight. So we'll see what Canelo Alvarez does.
Because Bivol said he if the business is right, basically, he'd be willing to go down to super middleweight to take Canelo's belt. So if you just made all these excuses for Canelo Alvarez and said it's wait, it's me got that wait. You said all the reason he lost had something to do with weight and obscene challenges and this, that, and the third.
Well, Ego, I understand your point when it comes down to about excuses, but I really don't think, all in all, that the weight is really an excuse. And once again, this is very interesting coming from a man that basically makes excuses about all the fighters that he wants to win losing. Like when Deontay Wilder ended up losing that fight against Tyson Fury, this man came out with 75, pretty much just the same bullshit excuses that Deontay Wilder came out with. His water was poisoned, there was egg whites in the glove, all sort of stupid bullshit. So if you want to talk about excuses, Ego, once again, I don't know what gives you the right to talk about any excuses, because you make excuses just as much as anybody when one of your favorite fighters loses. And that's how I know that you're not an objective and logical commentator, because you're a fanboy. It is what it is. But I don't think that the weight overall is really an excuse because I think that it's something somewhat based in reality. But at the end of the day, Canelo Alvarez was favored to win the fight, and he certainly was expected to perform better than what he did, and he did not perform well at all. He did not perform well at all. So Canelo Alvarez, what he's going to have to do once again, lose some of that muscle mass, come in there probably at the same weight as what you were at 168 pounds, and basically you're going to have to hope that your speed, you're going to have to hope overall that your stamina, you're also going to have to hope that your boxing ability overall is enough to defeat Dmitry Bivol at 175 pounds. But we'll see what happens with that.
So why would he say that Canelo, and here's the post, maybe the next fight will be for his belts at super middleweight. So Dmitry Bivol, shout out to him. He's about that action. We don't know if Canelo is. All this no boxing, no life, and face of boxing, all that is now on full display and will be tested. So if Dmitry Bivol said he'll come see you where you're a champion, why would Eddie Hearn, the promoter who says he works closely with Canelo, why would he be saying that Canelo might not want the Bivol fight at 168, but he just said he has to exhaust himself and eat his way up to 175 and take obscene challenges, and he's not a true 175 pounder? That makes no sense. You would think that if weight was truly the excuse and the reason he lost, that he would want to fight at his more natural weight. That's what you're saying is.
Well, that's understandable, Ego, and I understand what you're getting at. But Dmitry Bivol is a person that, even if he's able to get to 168, he's almost kind of like a David Benavidez. He's almost kind of like a natural light heavyweight going down to 168. And I know some people have been in my comment section and they've said, well, Dmitry Bivol, he's kind of a more natural 168 pounder. I'm not quite so sure about that. That's not me stating that he could not make the weight. But Dmitry Bivol, with his build, his height and reach, he's a natural 175 pounder. So we'll see on what happens. And what I will say is this: if that fight does happen at 168 pounds, and I think that Canelo also, if he is going to take the rematch, I think it would be better for his career for it to happen at 175 pounds. But we'll see on what happens. Not only because it probably would be better if he did win the belt at 175 and get his, revenge in a rematch potentially, but on top of that, so he also does not look bad at 168 if he potentially loses there. Because Dmitry Bivol, he's nothing to mess around with. And at Dmitry Bivol, if he does win the belts at 168, there's going to be no fighter that is going to beat him there. Not David Benavidez, certainly not Jamal Charlo, and not Demetrius Bubble if the best version of Dmitry Bivol shows up. But anyway.
More natural weight. But instead, you literally heard Eddie Hearn say he doesn't think 168 would get approved by Canelo, and then he changed the subject and didn't elaborate on it. But he already told on himself, whether it was a Freudian slip or whatever. I know why Canelo wouldn't want to fight, because he didn't lose because of the 175. Canelo wouldn't want to fight at 168 because.
Well, the reason why I think Canelo Alvarez lost was a combination of Dmitry Bivol's size and power, his skill set, and on top of that, Canelo, I don't think that he put on the best strategy. I don't think all in all that him putting on that muscle mass was really a good idea. Not every fighter is meant to do that, but we'll see what happens. But Canelo Alvarez, once again, and then Canelo, he also has not been gifted with great stamina. He never has been. Stamina has always been an issue for him. So Canelo, at this point in time in his career, what he really has to do is that he has to pace himself properly. And if you gain that muscle mass, all in all, to the point to where it was going to affect you, you're not really going to be able to pace yourself to the way that you want to. Once again, you can take a look at Canelo early on in that fight. He was breathing heavy overall from round 5 onwards. So as soon as I seen Canelo Alvarez back up in that fight as early on as he did, I said Canelo Alvarez is in some real trouble. Because the only time Canelo Alvarez really does that is if A, he's in there with a fighter that really is giving him a lot of problems, like a Floyd Mayweather Jr. or Gennady Golovkin, or B, he's out of breath. And he clearly was out of breath.
Him and his fans, his man fans, have zero excuse if Canelo gets beat at 168. So if Canelo gets beat at 168, I'm not going to say he's done, but for lack of a better word, he's done. The whole imagery of who Canelo is, look, whoever this dude crying is, that's going to be the Canelo man fans. People already.
Oh man, once again, it's so interesting how Mr. Ego talks about man fans and boxing. Once again, go ahead and take a look at how many times this man has literally been on the verge of tears talking about that Deontay Wilder loss. Anyway,
Making these memes and stuff. Look, bro, look, this face all mushed up, smashed up. You know what I mean? And that was just off the first fight. So if you fought Canelo, if Canelo fought him again and took it to the division where he hasn't been beaten at super middleweight and he's undisputed, you literally have no excuse why you lost. Because right now, the Canelo fans, they caping for him and they copping pleas. They're like, nah, Canelo wasn't big enough. He dared to be great and all that. So if he
well, I agree to a degree that Canelo Alvarez did dare to be great. And in my opinion, I think that it would be better, all in all, for Canelo Alvarez to face him still at 175 to potentially still get that dream of getting the belt because I think that Canelo Alvarez can make some adjustments in order overall to win at 175. But he is going to have to make some major adjustments. But if the fight does happen at 168, it could be very potentially interesting as well. So we'll see what happens.
fought and you said he had a great campaign and a great run at super middleweight, and if Bivol beats him at super middleweight, all that other stuff is dead and out the window. You can't say, oh, it's because Dmitry Bivol used his weight advantage. And that's a dumb excuse anyway. Anybody who knows boxing, because the way Bivol beat him, he didn't fight him like Tyson Fury versus Wilder and gain 34.
You see that basically that he's using his excuse about Tyson Fury versus Deontay Wilder. As you can see, Boxing Ego once again is still very, very heartbroken about that loss because Deontay Wilder was like a god to him because he's a fanboy. But anyways, when it comes down to it all in all, Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder, even though Fury very clearly had a weight advantage, I really don't even count that because Deontay Wilder, he pretty much is the same height and reach as Tyson Fury. Canelo Alvarez is a person that's 5'8", 5'9", with a 71-inch reach, and is pretty much a natural 160 pounder. So 168, is going to be very interesting as well. But I would prefer the fight to happen in 175 just to see all in all because I believe that it would be better for Canelo's career. But we'll see what happens.
60 pounds and lean all on him like Tyson Fury did with Otto Vailin, or Vladimir Klitschko, 6'6", would do to smaller heavyweights like Alexander Povetkin and guys like Kubrat Pulev. That's a whole completely different style. Bivol didn't use his weight; he used his skills, and that's
Well, he did use his skills, but he also was able to use his size. Right? He also was able to use his size.
probably why Canelo he got beat up. He lost dominantly. It wasn't even close.
I would agree with that. I think that it was about 8 rounds to 4. I thought that Canelo Alvarez clearly lost.
And it's funny because you still have people arguing Canelo's pound for pound number one. How? How do you so why do we even have rankings if no matter how you look in fight, you have a performance such as Canelo where the whole world knows you lost double digit rounds, 10, 11, 12, double digit, something in the double digits, right? And you still get to be considered that. That's like
I agree with you there. And listen, I like Canelo. I like Canelo Alvarez a lot. I think that he's an extraordinary fighter. But you can no longer be counted as a number one pound for pound fighter unless, in my view, you were able to avenge that loss. You came into that fight as the minus 500 favorite, and you ended up pretty much embarrassing yourself. So it is what it is. Once again, Canelo Alvarez, he's going to have to be very, very real with himself. And I think that if he is going to defeat Dmitry Bivol, especially at 175 pounds, he's going to have to lose some of that muscle mass. And once again, he's going to have to come up with a better strategy because Canelo was so exhausted in that fight. But it is what it is. We'll see what happens.
Steph Curry is like considered the greatest shooter in NBA history. If this season he missed a million shots.
I got to do some videos overall about some NBA basketball. I got to do videos on Steph Curry, especially because Steph Curry, for whatever reason, in the NBA media, is usually very, very highly disrespected, especially for what he's been able to accomplish. But that might come a little bit later on.
Then how are we going to say he's the greatest shooter? Part of being elite is showing up. And that's it. And having consistency. That's what makes.
Well, I agree, but Canelo Alvarez has usually shown up and he regularly overall has won the big fights. But he lost this one. So like I said, Canelo, what he's gonna have to do is that all in all that he is going to have to he is overall going to have to overall, make some adjustments. But Mr. Ego, what I will say about you is that, we can say the same thing about Mr. Deontay Wilder and Jamel Charlo. I pretty much agree with what Boxing Ego said. I thought that it was very well put. But if we're also gonna, keep that same energy, then Jamel Charlo, overall, especially before the Brian Castano fight, he really did not deserve to be on the top 10 pound for pound list because there was no A grade fighter that he really beat. And I thought that he clearly lost the first Brian Castano fight, and he also lost the fight against Tony Harrison. And Tony Harrison was never even a champion. He was known for getting knocked out in every single fight. Overall, that was a big fight in his career before he faced Jamel Charlo. So I agree with you. Consistency is key. And Canelo Alvarez in his last fight, he did not win. He did not win. So we'll see what Canelo can do from there.
Be great. I'm consistent. Since I started, I've been consistent.
No, you haven't really been consistent with anything other than your own bullshit, but it is what it is.
Never had a break from covering boxing. Never. If you look at, there's been times.
Yes, but you have been very inconsistent with some of your energy. All right, that's why you stated that you want to see the Canelo versus Jamal Charlo fight, but then when that fight was allegedly about to happen, you said that you didn't want to see that fight happen. So let's cut the bullshit. You're basically an actor.
I've been hurt, sick, pneumonia, breakups, makeups, tired, burnt out.
But anyways, that's pretty much overall about it for this video. I made it a bit longer, but at the end of the day, I thought that this video was necessary. But anyways, when it comes to Mr. Canelo Alvarez, we will see what ends up happening with him. I wish him the best of luck. I do think that he is an extraordinary fighter. But this is going to be a very interesting point in Canelo Alvarez's career and in his life. We're going to see all in all, can he adjust? Can he overall make the right adjustments and make the right physical and mental adjustments in that fight against Dmitry Bivol? And can he potentially have his dream of unifying at the 175-pound division? We'll see what happens. But anyways, that's really about it for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you all later.